Yo, what's going on, everybody? Welcome into another episode of Mets Daily on the Fan Arts Network. John Saponaro here with you today and every day to talk about our New York Mets. But of course, before we get started, a quick shout out goes to our friends over at Kalshi for sponsoring the video. You already know, but for a limited time, use the code FANARCHBASEBALL on the Kalshi app to get $10 when you trade 10. It's a shame that the season is over. It's a shame that the Mets have waved the white flag, but we can still talk about the positives. We can still talk about the wins when they matter, when they're good, how they get there. And that's what the Mets were able to accomplish last night. They get the victory over the Toronto Blue Jays up in Toronto 3-0. It was a tight game, both tightly contested and tightly played by the Mets and played by both sides. It was a fairly tidy game. And in the end, the Mets hit just enough. The Mets pitched really well in the starting rotation and in the bullpen. Shout out Nolan McLean. And they were able to walk away with a 3-0 win, kind of the way that you would draw it up. If you've got a young stud pitcher on the mound and you've got a good bullpen, which the Mets do, which the Mets did, and you've got a guy in Kevin Gausman who hadn't been pitching well, but, you know, the Mets offense has not been great. We know that, right? Well documented how bad it's been all season. And I said a couple days ago when I previewed this series, I wouldn't be surprised if Gausman was able to do some things against the Mets because pitchers that are lesser than him have given the Mets a lot of trouble. So when it was all said and done, Mets walked away with a win in the shutout, and there was a lot of positives. First of all, Francisco Alvarez, who we'll talk about a little bit deeper coming up in the second half of the show. He gets a home run, starts the scoring for the Mets. He is then matched by his counterpart, Luis Torrens. A couple innings later, he hits a home run, which is something that you don't expect to see. Not a guy with a tremendous amount of pop. I think he has 29 home runs for his career, but he hits a home run. Both of them very impressive. The Alvarez one was a very Alvarez-esque kind of shot. Dead center field, huge pop, unbelievable. And then the Torrens one, in a way, was Torrens-like in that he went to right field. And they mentioned it on the broadcast. Gary Cohen even surprised that a lot of his home runs, I think 13 out of the 29, something like that, have actually gone to right field. You think of Torrens as a right field hitter, but you don't think of him as a right field power hitter. But that's exactly what he provided. They were able to get a sacrifice fly later in the game, which was a nice little extra add-on run off the bat of Brett Beatty. He had a really good at-bat, stayed in there, able to do the job, get it done. That was set up by A.J. Ewing being on base yet again, and some really good base running from Ewing, able to get over to third base with less than 2 outs. Really heads up, really high IQ, really just what you look for in a runner, what you look for in a plus runner, and a guy with A.J. Ewing's skill set and a young ball player. So really good all around. Good from Alvarez, good from Torrens, couple good at-bats from Beatty. Soto, they wanted no part of him. They walked him a bunch. And again, Ewing kind of did his thing there to set up that final run. And I do need to mention that Bo Bichette played an unbelievably solid game at third base. Bo Bichette looked really, really, really good. He made a lot of great plays. I've said on this show that I thought Bo Bichette's defense was going to be fine at third base going back to the offseason. I said often that I thought Bo Bichette might actually grade out as a positive at third base because despite his deficiencies at shortstop, he would be moving to a quote-unquote easier position to play. And so far, that has bared out to be true. He did have to take a little bit of a sabbatical from third base to go back and fill in Lindor's stead for 2 months. And I think had he not had to do that on the fly, you'd be seeing an even better Bo Bichette at third base. If he had been playing there for the last couple months at third base consistently without having to move to shortstop, maybe a game here or whatever, maybe a day at DH or whatever. But if he had been playing third base every single day, I think he'd be even better at this point. But I think Bo Bichette's going to be a good third baseman. And we're not going to talk a lot about Bo Bichette today, but we probably will talk a lot about Bo Bichette at some point, either this week or next week. I know some folks are down on him, and I don't get why. I know that he had a really rough start, but I think Bo Bichette is a really good fit for this team, and I hope he opts in. We mentioned it, I think it was yesterday's show or the day before, where he's getting a little bit of unnecessary hate when we had that unnecessary hate segment for Bo Bichette. But he's a guy, especially if you look at the free agent class coming up in 2027, Mets need a player like him. The Mets might need to go out and make a trade for a bat anyway. That's with Lindor, that's with Soto, and that's if Bichette opts in or if he opts out and the Mets decide to keep him anyway with a new, different kind of deal, whatever. The Mets still might need to go out and trade for an offensive piece. There is not a lot of offense on the free agent market. If Bo Bichette went into the market, he'd be far and away the best player. I think the next best player is probably Jazz Chisholm, and that doesn't get you excited. So, when you look at the landscape of not only this team, but where this team wants to go, they need a third piece. They need a right-handed bat. They need Bo Bichette. So kudos to him for having a great game at third base. Nolan McLean was excellent. I did say on yesterday's show that I could see a situation where, having not faced the Blue Jays before, that he would give them some fits because you don't know about the breaking balls. You don't know about the 6 pitches. You don't know about the movement until you've seen the movement. You can read the scouting reports. You can watch videos. You can go on Twitter and check out Pitching Ninja. None of it matters until you stand in the box against this guy. And Nolan McLean was as good as advertised. I said it could be a hearkening back to what he did in his little 8 starts at the end of last season, and in a lot of ways it was. 6 innings pitched, 5 hits, 0 runs, 2 walks, 7 strikeouts. His first start this season with no runs allowed, which is kind of remarkable. They said that on the broadcast, and I was shocked to hear that. I know he had some really bad outings, but in his good outings, I kind of forgot that he was really a guy who slowed down a little bit third time around the batting order, gave up a run here or 2 runs there, or maybe would get, burned with a home run ball early and then settle in. So his first shutout of the season, not a shutout in the books because he obviously doesn't go 9, but his first appearance of the season where he does not allow a run. And the bullpen that he handed it off to was great again. The Mets bullpen is fantastic, and that's going to pay dividends for them in some way, shape, or form, either as they try to put together a respectable run in July, they try to play better baseball in the latter part of the summer, or, and more likely, if they trade off some of these pieces at the deadline to a desperate team who might need a lefty, who might need a setup man, who might need a closer. The Mets aren't going to trade their closer in Devin Williams, but they might trade another asset who could be a closer, who has been a closer in the past. So it's nice to see the New York Mets have a good bullpen. If you followed this team for any stretch of time, you know that the bullpen has been the downfall of many a New York Mets team. The only shame in all of this is that their bullpen is great, and it kind of doesn't matter. It comes in a year where who cares? Because the rest of the team buried him. But one guy who I think we've talked about before, but deserves to be talked about again, and maybe with a bit more seriousness now, is Luke Weaver. Luke Weaver has been the definition of unhittable. With his outing last night, he has reached 24 scoreless innings. That's 3rd all-time among Mets relief pitchers, trailing only Jesse Orosco and Jeremy Guthrie. And he is climbing up that list really, really quickly. It's been 2 months since Luke Weaver has allowed a run. Luke Weaver has, I think more so than anybody else, bought into this concept by Mets pitching coach Justin Willard of being nasty in the zone. And Luke Weaver has really good stuff. Luke Weaver has the ability to beat you by challenging you. And that's what Luke Weaver has done. He's not nibbling. And a lot of that is on stuff, yes, but a lot of that comes with confidence, pitching with confidence. And that's what Luke Weaver has been doing. Luke Weaver is pitching aggressively, assertively, and with confidence. And he's allowing his stuff to be, to quote Justin Willard, nasty in the zone. Now, for the first time since I've been hosting Mets Daily, because I said we were going to try to push this off as long as possible. For the first time, it's going to come on July 1st. Trading season is here. Mets already made a trade with David Peterson last week. We're going to stick our toe in the water a little bit on the seller's market here with Luke Weaver. I'm torn, you guys. I am torn on Luke Weaver. Let's talk about the pros to trade Luke Weaver. One, he's having a great season. So just in and of itself, he is a great asset to have. 2, relief pitchers, like I mentioned a little bit ago, are always, 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 always valuable at the deadline because you can never have enough pitching. You can never have enough bullpen. And if you are a team that is trying to either push their chips in to make the playoffs, but especially if you're a team that thinks you can make a deep run and you're going to try to win a championship, you need bullpen arms. The more you have, the better off you will be, period. And also, we've seen a lot where, and this can happen to any player, but we've seen a lot with position players and everyday players. You make a big trade at the deadline, and sometimes those guys don't pan out. There's a comfortability, there's a lack of comfortability where they're just not, they can't settle in. They can't provide what you need them to provide. We've seen a lot of everyday players who are traded at the deadline falter a bit for their new team. And I think with pitchers, starters or relievers, it's a little easier to translate. You just go in and you just pitch. I know that's a wild oversimplification, but it's the truth. You go in and you pitch. You don't have to worry about where you fit into the lineup. You don't have to worry about, changing positions or moving to DH or whatever, playing every day, adjusting to a new ballpark, the new weather, new conditions. You don't have to worry about that. You go out there and you just pitch. And if your stuff is good enough and you trust it, like Luke Weaver has, you just go out there and you pitch. And I think for relief pitchers, it's one step further because, again, you're not carrying a starter's workload. Now, yes, you are a fireman. You're going in at the biggest moments of the season for a new team. And if you've been traded from a team, that means that your team hasn't had a lot of clutch moments because your team that you were coming from is bad. And the team that you are going to is now relying on you heavily. And sure, that can play with your psyche a little bit. That can play with your confidence. A bad outing here or a bad outing there can tank your entire rest of your season. Hell, we saw it with Ryan Helsley last year. Ryan Helsley was a little bit down when the Mets acquired him from what he had been in years past. But Ryan Helsley fell apart because he was tipping, he wasn't tipping. Basically, he had a couple bad outings to start, and that screwed him up royally between the ears and his mechanics and everything about him. And he never rebounded, and the Mets missed the playoffs. But generally speaking, I think it's easier for a relief pitcher to kind of acclimate to a new environment. So you've got the fact that he's a great asset having a great season. Relief pitchers are such a hot commodity at the trade deadline every year because there's a supply and demand situation. And then this is the big one. And this one's going to cut both ways. Luke Weaver is signed for 2027. The Mets signed Luke Weaver to a 2-year deal before this season. So a team acquiring Luke Weaver would get Luke Weaver's services or Luke Weaver's rights, not only for the remainder of this season and their playoff push, but into next season as well. Whether they wanted to keep that asset for themselves or whether they wanted to try to flip Luke Weaver in the offseason, they could do that. Bottom line is they have, like I said, control of his rights for another season beyond this season. That means that the Mets can ask for more. He becomes more valuable. This is not a rental. And a team acquiring him has to understand that and has to understand that they are acquiring a commodity that's not only here to help them in 2026. So that's the reasons to trade Luke Weaver. The reasons to not trade Luke Weaver are, well, let's start right back at the last one I just mentioned. He's controllable. You have his rights. You have him on your team under contract for 2027. And if you're the New York Mets, that's valuable for 2 reasons. 1, Luke Weaver can pitch in New York. Period. Luke Weaver pitched in the Bronx to great success. Now, of course, he's a relief pitcher. There were some ups and downs along the way, but he battled that adversity. Luke Weaver has been a closer. He's pitched in leverage for really good Yankees teams. And now Luke Weaver has been a massive weapon in the 8th inning and sometimes filling in for Devin Williams, although the Mets haven't had too many instances where Devin Williams is saving games left and right. So his Luke Weaver's opportunity to close out games hasn't been as much as you would like if the team was winning more close games. But I digress. Luke Weaver is a New York guy, battle tested. The fact that he's under control for 2027 makes that a little harder to move. And the other part of it that's an offshoot, it's all kind of connected. The Mets, look, we can debate it. You guys could disagree with me. You could say I'm crazy and I'm pie in the sky and I'm too optimistic. You guys, the Mets are not planning to be a bad team in 2027. I know the Mets weren't planning to be a bad team in 2026, and a couple things went awry. But the Mets have money coming off the books. They have roster spots that are going to be cleared up. The Mets have a tremendous amount of talent, both at the star level and at the young player level, guys coming up. The Mets have money and money and money and money to spend, and the Mets do have some assets that they can trade if they wanted to. So when I look at this right now, on July 1st, I can't tell you what the Mets are going to do, and I can't tell you what John Saponaro would want to do. I can't. Because the case to trade Luke Weaver is strong. Very strong. The case to keep Luke Weaver is almost as strong. They're neck and neck to me. Now, I think what you could get back because of what a valuable asset he has become might ultimately be the thing that pushes this over the line and causes the Mets to trade him if, you forced me to pick something on July 1st, trade or no trade. But I don't know how I would feel about it. I really don't. Prospects are lottery tickets. And again, the Mets are not a tearing down team. The Mets are not a full fire sale team. The Mets are a team that some of their own doings, some bad luck, some injuries, some whatever, had a bad year in 2026. But I don't think the Mets are expecting to be this way again in 2027. And that would give me a little bit of pause when it comes to Luke Weaver. But one thing is for sure, we're going to find out. And I think we're going to find out in some ways sooner rather than later. There's still about a month to go for the trade deadline, August 3rd this year. So a little over a month. But I think the Mets, because of how far they've fallen and where they are and some of the assets they have, I think the Mets are going to try to control the market a little bit. Now, it's not to say that they're going to rush out and trade people, but I think if the Mets have an opportunity to get something of significant value, they're going to bite. It's not exactly apples to apples, but it's similar to what happened with David Peterson. The Mets just wanted David Peterson off the team at this point, let's be honest. But the Mets got a prospect who is much better than I think any of us would have thought for a guy in Peterson who was pitching to a 6 ERA in his walk year and has been a middling pitcher at best. The Mets got good value, so they jumped at it. Now, you're going to get more value for a guy like Luke Weaver for everything I just mentioned. But I think if they get the value that they want or above what they want in an offer, they will jump at it. But I guess they'd be foolish not to. But man, it would be great to have this version of Luke Weaver around in a real season in 2027. Speaking of seasons, baseball season is here. And now you can trade every game on Kalshi. You guys know what I do. Before I hit record, I sit down at the computer, I pop open Kalshi.com or the Kalshi app on my phone, and I try to find something interesting for you, maybe where you can get some value. And I like Francisco Lindor over 1.5 RBI, trading at 22 cents a share for today's game. 22 cents a share means if you go with the over 1.5 RBIs on the game, and Lindor has over 1.5 RBIs on the game, $100 will get you $431. Toronto is going with an opener, guy by the name of Braden Fisher, who I don't know a ton about, but he's got a 6.48 ERA in his last 7 appearances. Right-handed pitcher. Obviously, Lindor is a switch hitter. We'll see what this guy can offer in terms of being an opener. Is he going to go 1 inning? Is he going to go 2? Either way, he's only going to face Lindor once. But then after that, Patrick Corbin is coming into the game. Patrick Corbin was just taken out of the starting rotation because of how bad he's been, We know Patrick Corbin is a lefty, of course, very well documented his time going against the Mets as a member of the Washington Nationals, but Lindor has a career .298 average with a .900 OPS, 3 home runs, and 4 RBI against Patrick Corbin in 47 plate appearances. So I like the matchup with Fisher, and I love the matchup with Corbin. The only thing that you have to check, because I'm recording this the night before, the only thing you have to check before you look to find value on this trade is if Lindor is going to play in this game. That's the only thing you got to check, because the Mets have been 2 days on, 1 day off with Lindor. This is a day game after a night game, but the Mets do have an off day on Thursday. So just check and make sure Lindor is in the lineup. I do think because the Mets caught Torrens last night and DH'd Alvarez, you're going to see Alvarez catching the game, and that opens up the possibility for Lindor to maybe DH and get off of his feet. Or, again, they just play him in the field at shortstop knowing that there's an off day coming on Thursday. But I like the value if he plays. Lindor, over 1.5 RBI at 22 cents a share, $100 will get you $431. On Kalshi, you're trading against peers in a live market, meaning there is no house, and as the probability changes, you can buy in and out of your position for a limited time. Download the Kalshi app and use the code FANARCHBASEBALL to get $10 when you trade 10. Kalshi, trade on anything, must be 18 and over. Restrictions and eligibility requirements apply. Event contract trading involves risks and may not be suitable for all investors. Prices, values, and available markets may differ from those mentioned. For more information, see kalshi.com/regulatory. Back to our New York Mets. Back to the other Francisco on the team, Francisco Alvarez. Has he returned to form from his rookie year? I think it's a little early to say that definitively, but Francisco Alvarez is doing some very, very, very good things. And this is why I've been banging the drum on this show, on Twitter, on Till Mets Do Us Part, that Francisco Alvarez, while disappointing, while not number one prospect, while not living up to the hype of that prospect billing or his rookie year where he was excellent, while being regressing a bit defensively, while all of that might be true, I think that Francisco Alvarez should not be lumped in with the other quote-unquote baby Mets who have been failures, who have been massive, massive disappointments to the tune of not even being playable. Francisco Alvarez has been confounding. He's been frustrating. He's been disappointing, but he's not been unplayable. He's not been borderline unrosterable, which is what Brett Beatty and Mark Vientos has given you at times, and to a lesser extent, Ronnie Mauricio. But Ronnie Mauricio can't stay healthy long enough to be rosterable or not. Francisco Alvarez is showing you what he is capable of. He's got an .821 OPS in June, despite missing some games. I think he missed the first week while he was still recovering from his meniscus injury. He's got 5 home runs this month, which is the second most he's ever had in a month. Second to only his July in 2023, where he had 8 home runs. And that was a part of his rookie year where he hit, I think, 23 home runs, 24 home runs, if I remember correctly. So Francisco Alvarez is showing you the kind of hitter and the kind of force he can be in the middle of the Mets lineup. And I talked in the first segment about how the Mets need another hitter. I don't want Bo Bichette to leave because the Mets need a guy like Bo Bichette. Well, the Mets need a guy like Bo Bichette, but maybe the Mets don't have to trade for another hitter if Francisco Alvarez finally starts to show the consistent power potential that we thought we were going to get from his rookie year. He's not hit more than 11 home runs in a season since that 23 home run campaign as a rookie. But I think he's going to surpass that number this year of 11, of course. We'll see if he can get to 20, 25, maybe 30. Who knows? If he gets hot, he can do it. He's got power for days. And what I like about Alvarez, and I said this on the show when he was first coming back, that I don't mind splitting the catching duties between Luis Torrens and Francisco Alvarez to keep Alvarez's bat in the lineup to try to keep Alvarez a bit healthier and to maximize what both guys do well. Alvarez is an offensive player. Torrens is a defensive player. Torrens is going to give you unbelievable defense, one of the best in the league behind the plate. So I like having both of them out there. Now, I'm not a fan of having a locked-in DH unless you have an elite DH. Kyle Schwarber, Shohei Ohtani, Yordan Alvarez, prime Big Papi David Ortiz kind of stuff. Edgar Martinez. Like a locked-in DH that's just great. In a few years for the New York Mets, that'll probably be Juan Soto, but that has not happened yet. I think he'll have probably a little detour at first base before he finds his way to a full-time DH. I think Juan Soto is going to have a progression of right field, left field, first base, and then eventually DH. But I digress again. I'm not a fan of having a locked-in DH. But with Francisco Alvarez, if he hits, and this back half of the season in 2026 is going to be the audition for this, I am a fan, especially with the extension given to Luis Torrens, of Francisco Alvarez being a 50-50 catcher DH. Most of the time DH, some of the time DH, whatever. For all the reasons I mentioned. Maximize what both players do well. Keep Francisco Alvarez healthy. Get great defense behind the plate. All of those things make a tremendous amount of sense. And that's where some of the Mets prospects are going to come into play here. Namely, Chris Suero, but maybe even to a lesser extent, Kevin Parada. And I know, you mentioned Kevin Parada, you get laughed out of the building, and he probably will not be a factor. But Kevin Parada has been hitting really well since being promoted to AAA. This is a guy who has basically never lived up to the number one, round one pick hype in the minors, never hit enough to live up to his offensive profile. And the Mets finally just said, look, as he lost all of his prospect status and he fell off every ranking that he's ever been on, they just said, there's nothing to lose. Send him to AAA. He's not hitting in AA. I don't know. We'll see. Sending him up to a harder level has been some kind of magic elixir for Kevin Parada. Will he find his way on the Mets? I don't know. Will he ever be a factor? Probably not. But Christopher Suero, the Mets really like. He's in AA right now. And if you're not familiar with these guys, both of them, Parada and Suero, are catchers. But Parada is a catcher that he's an offensive first guy, but he's a guy that maybe can play a little corner outfield, a little left field. Suero is very impressive. Christopher Suero is a catcher who can play a lot of spots on the diamond. Think of like a poor man's Dalton Varsho. Play outfield, first base, do a lot of different things. So I do think it'll likely be Suero more so than Kevin Parada. But if Suero can live up to the billing, if he can arrive in 2027, which is his estimated timetable, he can continue to grow in AA, maybe get to AAA by the end of this season, and he'd be knocking on the door. He is an asset that you could deploy in so many different ways when you already have a catching tandem of Francisco Alvarez and Luis Torrens. You need, if you're going to DH your catcher, a lot. Right now, the Mets don't, not to say they don't care, but the Mets aren't trying to win anymore. The Mets aren't about wins and losses in 2026, so they can get a little cuter. If you're trying to worry about wins and losses, you can't DH one of your catchers a lot, all the time. Because in case of emergency, then what happens? You like to have a catcher on the bench. Well, with Suero, and again, to a lesser extent, Parada, not only would you have a catcher on the bench, but you'd have a catcher that also provides some offensive ability. Suero's got a lot of pop. And you also would have a catcher, especially with Suero, who you can use in other capacities too if you needed to. So you're not carrying the dreaded 3 catchers. Because Luis Torrens is a catcher. That's it, period. Francisco Alvarez, if he's not going to DH, he's a catcher, period. He can't play another position. But if you have a guy like Suero, or again, to a lesser extent, Kevin Parada, there's a chance that one of these guys can be on your bench and be your hybrid, not just an emergency catcher, a guy who can put the gear on in case of emergency, break glass, but a guy who can be a catcher while also providing you with other value, while also letting Francisco Alvarez do what he does best, which is hit baseballs. Because the one thing I will say is you cannot deploy this strategy if your third catcher is Hayden Senger. Sorry. Hayden Senger seems like a nice guy. Hayden Senger's a great story, going from, stocking shelves at Whole Foods to being in the major leagues. I love that for him. He's not a major league hitter at all. I don't know if he's a AAA hitter. I don't know if he's a AA hitter. So you can't deploy this strategy, or at least you can't deploy it as effectively if you're just carrying three catchers, one of whom is an absolute zero and probably a negative value offensively. But again, those three guys, Senger, Torrens, and Alvarez, they're all just catchers. So the Mets really, 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 really need one of these guys, whether it's Parada, who came in with all the fanfare and the first round draft pick and all that stuff, or if it's Suero, and I think right now it's more likely to be Suero, who kind of burst on the scene because of some of the stuff that he could do, because of the athleticism, because of the power, because of the versatility. Mets need one of those guys to step up, and then they can get a little bit more creative with their catching situation in 2027 and beyond. Last but not least, we won't spend a lot of time on this. The Mets made a signing. They signed Christopher Morel, who was recently DFA'd by the Miami Marlins after having not a lot of opportunity and then not being very good. They signed Christopher Morel to a minor league deal. There's an adage in baseball that there's no such thing as a bad minor league deal, and that is absolutely true. There's no risk. This shouldn't get you excited, but there's no risk. You could cut bait. I believe he has some opt-outs, which is pretty typical of minor league deals now for guys who have spent some time in the majors. If I'm not on the team by X date, I can opt out. And sometimes there's multiple of those dates. Maybe he opts into the first one, opts out on the second one. There's some good faith going back and forth there between player and organization. I believe that there's at least one of those opt-outs for Morel in the deal. It hadn't been released exactly when that was, or at least to my knowledge, I haven't seen it. So it's a good deal for the Mets in that it's just another guy. It's another guy you can put in AAA and you can see what happens. But I think there's a couple funny things about Christopher Morel as it relates to the New York Mets. A couple of years ago, I don't know if you guys remember this, there was all the talk about maybe the Cubs trading for Pete Alonso. This was after Alonso turned down the Billy Epler extension. The whatever it was, 7 years, $158 million or whatever. He turned down that deal, and then there was a lot of talk about, will the Mets trade Pete Alonso? Where could he go? Cubs. And the Cubs had this, at the time, prospect Christopher Morel, and they wanted to use Christopher Morel. There was all the reporting was that Christopher Morel could be the headliner in a Pete Alonso deal. It's funny how these things work out. Christopher Morel goes from the Cubs, I believe, to the Tampa Bay Rays, and then from the Rays to the Miami Marlins. There might have been another team in there. Basically, Morel never panned out as a prospect. Bounced around the league, minors, a couple different teams, and now he winds up on the Mets anyway, on a minor league deal. May never play for the Mets still, not in the majors anyway. And the Cubs obviously don't get Pete Alonso. The Cubs don't wind up with Alonso. Alonso winds up not with the Mets anymore either. He winds up in Baltimore. It's just funny how these things shake out. The other thing that I think is interesting about Christopher Morel, and again, not a guy we should spend a lot of time on, and we won't. Not a guy to get excited about, and I'm not. But he's had a bad year, and again, not a lot of opportunity, and he's been bad when he did have opportunities. But he's very eerily similar to Mark Vientos as a player, as an offensive player. He's a little bit better than Vientos in terms of athleticism in that he can play the outfield. Morel is like a third baseman, first baseman, outfield, like left, right field kind of guy. So a little bit better athletically there because we know Vientos is barely a first baseman. I mean, the guy shouldn't even have a glove at this point. But for their careers, they're similar offensive profiles. And I don't know if Christopher Morel will ever be on the Mets in 2026. The way this team has gone with their injuries and stuff, he probably will. But if Christopher Morel is the thing, if he's the guy, if he's the catalyst for the Mets to be able to move on from Mark Vientos, oh my God, that would be great. That would be great. And there is some writing on the wall. Mets wave the white flag. Mets fire Carlos Mendoza. Mets go to Andy Green. And in 2 of the 4 games that Andy Green has managed for the Mets so far, or 2 of the 5, whatever it's been, Mark Vientos has played 2 games at third base. He came in to a game and went into third base, and then he started a game at third base because the Mets are trying to trade Mark Vientos. The Mets are trying to show you that Mark Vientos has some kind of value and he can stand at third base, and maybe you could get a nonsense prospect for him, a 17-year-old relief pitcher in high A. And maybe Christopher Morel becomes the replacement for Vientos. And again, he's not going to be anything great. He might even be the same exact player. But he'd be the same exact player without all the baggage. And sometimes when we talk about change of scenery, that's what we mean. A lot of times we talk about change of scenery, we talk about it on the high end. Oh, it's a change of scenery guy, maybe we can unlock something. It's not always that. Sometimes it's just a change for change's sake. You roll one guy in to get one guy out because the guy who's here has just got so much friggin' baggage. And that's what Mark Vientos is. He's carrying around a backpack, a duffel bag, a carry-on, 2 suitcases. This guy's way over the weight limit on his luggage. So maybe Christopher Morel is another little tidbit, another bit of writing on that wall that Mark Vientos will soon no longer be a New York Met. And I think Mark Vientos needs to no longer be a New York Met. That's going to do it for this episode of Mets Daily. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, we're sitting at just over 4,000 subscribers, and we would love more than anything to get to 5,000 before the season is over. And more importantly than that, we would love for you to be a part of it. This has been a lot of fun for me in the 1 month. It's been 30 days since I started this show. Happy 1 month anniversary to me. It's been a lot of fun doing this show, hanging out with some of you guys, seeing some of the crossover between Mets Daily and Till Mets Do Us Part. Either way, had people from Till Mets Do Us Part say they've been tuning into Mets Daily, and that's awesome. And today on our live show, we had somebody who came into the live comments and said, hey, I found you on Mets Daily. I really like you, and this show is fun too. And that's awesome. But anyway, it's been fun getting to know you guys. I hope you've had fun getting to know me. And so as we inch closer to 5,000 subscribers, we'd love for you to be a part of it. We want the community to grow because when the community's bigger, we can have a lot more fun together. Until next time, I'm John Saponaro. See you tomorrow.